The sun was slowly rising over the horizon, casting long golden rays across the rugged landscape of the frontier town. Dust swirled gently in the warm morning air as people began to stir, preparing for another day of hard work and survival. This was not a town of luxury or ease. Every building, every cart, and every worn plank of wood told a story of struggle, courage, and determination. Among the early risers was a young Apache woman, moving with quiet purpose along the edge of the main street. Her eyes, dark and alert, scanned the surroundings carefully, wary of the world she had chosen to enter. She was no stranger to hardship. Having grown up in a community that prized courage, skill, and independence, but even the strongest spirit can feel the weight of uncertainty when faced with the unknown. Her name was Ayala, and though she had grown accustomed to the rhythms of life in her own village, the frontier town was entirely different. There were sounds here she was not used to: the clatter of wagon wheels, the creaking of wooden signs in the wind, and the low murmur of voices speaking a language she only partially understood. Merchants called out to customers, hawking everything from dried meat to blankets, while horses stamped impatiently, their riders urging them forward. It was a place of opportunity, but also of danger. Outsiders often carried intentions that were hard to read, and Ayala had learned long ago to trust her instincts. Today, however, she had a purpose that outweighed her caution. She needed to acquire supplies for her family, and the journey demanded bravery. As she approached the trading post, the central hub of activity in the town, she noticed the familiar sights of merchants arranging their goods. Barrels of flour, sacks of dried beans, and stacks of firewood were all displayed with care. The smell of fresh bread wafted from a nearby bakery, mingling with the earthy scent of horses and the faint tang of leather from the saddlery. Despite the chaos, Ayala moved with calm determination. Every step was deliberate, as though she were blending into the background, observing without drawing attention. She knew that being noticed too quickly could bring questions she was not ready to answer, or trouble she was not prepared to face. It was then that she noticed him. A tall man, wearing a wide-brimmed hat that shaded his eyes, was leaning against the railing of the trading post. His clothes were simple but practical: a weathered shirt, sturdy trousers, and boots that had clearly seen long miles of travel. There was a sense of quiet confidence about him, the kind that comes not from boasting but from experience. He was a cowboy, seasoned and steady, someone who had spent countless hours on the open range, understanding the land and the animals that inhabited it. He seemed to be observing her as much as she was observing him, his gaze calm, steady, and unthreatening. Something about his presence intrigued her, though she was careful not to show it. Their first interaction was cautious. He tipped his hat slightly in greeting, and she nodded in acknowledgement, her expression guarded. Words were exchanged, simple at first, about the weather and the town's daily routines. The conversation was tentative, each testing the other's intentions. Ayala's voice carried the quiet strength of someone who had learned to speak only when necessary, while the cowboy's tone was measured, patient, and respectful. There was no rush, no demand for trust, only the careful weaving of dialogue that allowed a connection to begin forming. They spoke about the land, how the morning sun warmed the hills, how the winds shaped the paths of rivers, and how survival depended on understanding the patterns of nature. Through these small exchanges, a subtle bond started to emerge. Ayala shared a little about her journey, though she did so indirectly, careful not to reveal too much. She mentioned her need to gather supplies, hinting at the importance of the task without fully explaining it. The cowboy listened intently, asking thoughtful questions without pressing for details she was not ready to provide. His presence was steadying, and she found herself relaxing, if only slightly. It was rare for her to encounter someone who could speak so plainly, yet so meaningfully. Someone who seemed genuinely interested without judgment or expectation. In this brief encounter, the first seeds of trust began to take root. As the morning moved forward, more people gathered around the trading post. Merchants shouted their prices, children ran between carts, and horses whinnied in anticipation of movement. Yet amid the bustling activity, Ayala felt a strange sense of calm when she glanced toward the cowboy. There was no immediate need for words. The silence between them was not empty but comfortable. A shared understanding that each could navigate their own challenges, while acknowledging the other's presence. In a place filled with uncertainty, this quiet companionship was remarkable. It offered her a glimpse of reassurance that perhaps not all outsiders were to be feared. The cowboy, noticing her careful movements, made a casual remark about handling heavy loads and balancing supplies, a skill he had learned over years of cattle drives. Ayela's interest was piqued, though she masked it behind a polite nod. She had always prided herself on her ability to manage difficult tasks, but the mention of proper technique sparked a curiosity she could not ignore. For the first time that morning, she considered that she might not have to face her challenge entirely alone. The thought was both comforting and intimidating. Accepting guidance did not come easily to her, but the cowboy's demeanor suggested that his advice could be trusted. Their conversation continued in small, measured steps, touching on topics that revealed their characters without forcing intimacy. He spoke of the land, the animals, and the practicalities of frontier life, weaving stories that were instructive, yet never condescending. She responded with her own observations, sharing insights from her upbringing that reflected her intelligence, resilience, and deep connection to her people. Each exchange built a bridge between two worlds that rarely intersected, a bridge made not of grand gestures, but of careful listening, mutual respect, and shared humanity. By the time the sun had climbed higher, their dialogue had transformed from cautious pleasantries to a subtle understanding that they could learn from one another. By late morning, Ayela had completed her initial shopping, her cart laden with supplies she knew would sustain her family for weeks. Yet her thoughts remained with the cowboy, whose quiet guidance had sparked an unexpected sense of confidence. She realized that while the world was full of uncertainty and potential danger, moments like this offered the possibility of collaboration, of learning from those whose experiences differed from one's own. For the first time, she considered that fear could be met not only with caution but with preparation and wisdom shared by another who had walked a difficult path before. As she prepared to leave the trading post, the cowboy offered a final piece of advice, simple, direct, and yet profound in its practicality. It was not a command, but a suggestion born of experience, meant to make her journey safer and more manageable. Ayela listened carefully, committing the instructions to memory. There was no pressure, no insistence, just a quiet assurance that she could succeed if she approached the challenge methodically. In that moment, she recognized the beginning of a lesson that would carry her through trials she had not yet imagined. With her supplies secured and her resolve strengthened, Ayela left the trading post, her mind buzzing with a mix of apprehension and determination. The frontier town receded behind her, replaced by the open expanse of land that stretched in every direction, filled with both opportunity and risk. She felt a strange gratitude for the encounter, for the cowboy whose simple presence and careful words had offered a measure of clarity amid the chaos of the world. Though their journey together was only beginning, she sensed that this meeting would shape the path ahead, teaching her lessons in patience, courage, and the quiet power of guidance. As the sun climbed higher, casting light on the rugged terrain, Ayela walked with a newfound sense of purpose. Her steps were measured, deliberate, each one carrying the weight of responsibility and hope. She knew the challenges ahead would not be easy, but the memory of the cowboy's calm, steady voice lingered in her mind, a reminder that even in the face of fear, preparation and careful action could make the impossible possible. And so, with determination in her heart and wisdom quietly guiding her steps, she ventured forward, ready to face the trials that lay ahead, unaware yet of the pivotal moment that would soon test her courage and transform her understanding of strength. Ayela had returned to the edge of her village, her mind still racing from the morning's encounter at the trading post. The supplies she had gathered were heavy, and the thought of moving them across the rough terrain filled her with unease. She had faced many challenges before, but this task felt different, larger, heavier, and somehow more intimidating. Her heart pounded as she imagined the journey ahead. The uneven paths, the sudden slopes, the unpredictable weather. Every step seemed like it would require more strength than she possessed. She paused for a moment, gripping the handles of the wagon she had borrowed from a nearby trader. Her hands were rough from years of work, but the strain felt new, almost as if the weight of responsibility pressed on more than just her muscles. Her mind wandered back to the cowboy at the trading post. His calm voice, his careful instructions, and the quiet confidence he had carried seemed almost otherworldly, in contrast to the chaos she had grown accustomed to. She remembered how he had spoken not with arrogance, but with patience. How he had allowed her to feel in control, to make her own decisions while gently guiding her. The memory gave her a flicker of hope, though she was not yet ready to admit it. Could she trust her instincts enough to follow the path he had suggested? Could she manage a load that seemed almost impossibly large? Ayala took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. The first step, she reminded herself, was always the hardest. The sun was climbing higher, casting sharp shadows across the dusty ground. She began the slow, deliberate process of preparing the wagon. The supplies had to be arranged carefully, each sack, bundle, and box placed in a way that would balance the weight evenly. She recalled the cowboy's words, "Sit down slowly." At first, she had not fully understood their meaning. Now, as she faced the task, she realized it was about more than just sitting. It was about approaching the challenge with patience, control, and awareness. She adjusted a sack of grain, then a bundle of blankets, checking and rechecking to ensure nothing would shift unexpectedly. Her hands moved with precision, guided by both experience and a new, cautious confidence. Despite her careful planning, fear lingered like a shadow. She imagined the wagon tipping over, supplies spilling across the dirt path, her progress halted. The thought made her hesitate, her muscles tense, and her breath quicken. She leaned back for a moment, closing her eyes and taking slow, deep breaths. She reminded herself that fear was not weakness, it was a signal to prepare, to focus, and to act with intention. The cowboy's calm presence at the trading post had left a lasting impression, and she found herself imagining his voice guiding her step by step. Slowly, deliberately, she lifted herself to the position he had suggested, careful to follow the rhythm he had described. As she settled into place, the wagon creaked beneath her, a reminder of the physical strain and the precarious balance she had to maintain. The horses, sensing her tension, shifted slightly in their harnesses. She paused, placing her hands firmly on the reins, her knuckles white with effort. It was a test of patience and control. One wrong move could disrupt everything, but Ayala reminded herself of the lessons she had learned from her life, that preparation, observation, and steady action often carried more weight than raw strength. Slowly, she adjusted her position, shifting her weight with care, feeling the load settle evenly. The fear that had seemed overwhelming began to ebb, replaced by concentration and determination. Step by step, she guided the wagon along the first stretch of the path. The terrain was uneven, with rocks and roots threatening to trip the wheels. But she moved carefully, keeping her eyes on the ground and her hands steady. The supplies remained balanced, and the horses followed her lead, responding to her calm yet firm commands. Every successful movement bolstered her confidence. She began to realize that the challenge, though daunting, was manageable. She had learned to read the land, to anticipate the movements of the animals, and to adjust her actions accordingly. The cowboy's advice, simple though it had been, had become a practical guide she could apply in real life. It was not magic, it was preparation, attention, and patience in action. As she continued, her thoughts drifted to the larger significance of her task. The supplies were more than mere goods. They represented sustenance and support for her family and her community. Each bundle of food, each carefully packed item, carried the weight of responsibility. The journey ahead was symbolic, as much as it was physical. It tested not only her strength but her resolve, courage, and ability to act under pressure. She felt a sense of pride in this realization. The fear that had gripped her at first, now transformed into determination. She was not merely moving supplies, she was carrying hope, resilience, and the trust of those who depended on her. By midday, the sun was high, and the heat began to press down, making every movement more taxing. Sweat ran down her back, and her arms ached from holding the reins steadily. Yet, she persisted, reminding herself of the importance of her task. The cowboy's words echoed in her mind again. Sit down slowly. Each repetition was a mental cue, a reminder to act with care and deliberation. She adjusted the wagon again, checking that the bundles were secure and that the horses were comfortable. She allowed herself brief moments to pause, stretch, and breathe deeply, respecting both her limits and the challenge ahead. It was a delicate balance of effort and restraint. Along the path, she encountered obstacles that tested her focus. A sudden dip in the trail caused the wagon to jolt, and she felt the weight shift dangerously. Her heart leaped into her throat, but she responded calmly, adjusting the reins and leaning into the motion, allowing the momentum to stabilize. Each small victory reinforced her confidence, and she began to trust not only the cowboy's guidance but also her own judgment. She realized that courage was not the absence of fear, it was acting thoughtfully in spite of it. Her muscles ached, and her breath came in short gasps. But with each step, she felt more capable, more grounded, and more in control of the situation. As the day progressed, she passed familiar landmarks along the path. A cluster of oak trees, where children often played. A small creek with clear water, where her family had collected drinking water, and the distant rise of a hill that marked the halfway point of her journey. Each marker reminded her of home and her purpose, giving her strength to continue. She allowed herself to reflect on the journey so far, acknowledging both the progress and the challenges. The path ahead remained difficult, but she no longer felt overwhelmed. The careful preparation, the guidance she had received, and her own determination had created a foundation she could rely on. Toward late afternoon, the terrain grew steeper, and the wagon became harder to maneuver. She could feel the strain in her arms and legs, but she refused to let frustration take hold. Instead, she slowed her pace, taking deliberate, measured actions. Every adjustment, every careful shift of weight, kept the wagon steady. She spoke softly to the horses, reassuring them and herself. The rhythm of her movements became almost meditative, a dance of coordination, patience, and awareness. The fear that had once loomed so large now seemed like a distant shadow, replaced by focus and resilience. By evening, she reached a small clearing where she paused to rest. The sun was dipping below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink. She allowed herself a brief moment to breathe fully, feeling the satisfaction of accomplishment mingled with exhaustion. The cowboy's advice had guided her, not just in practical terms, but in mindset. Acting slowly, deliberately, and thoughtfully had transformed a task that initially seemed impossible into one that was achievable. She realized that the journey was not only about moving the supplies but about proving to herself that she could face fear and overcome it with patience, preparation, and determination. As night approached, Ayala prepared to set up a temporary camp for the horses and the wagon. She gathered firewood, checked the stability of the cargo, and ensured that the animals were comfortable and fed. Her muscles ached, and her body was fatigued, but her spirit felt strong. She had confronted a challenge that had seemed insurmountable, and in doing so, had gained confidence she had not known she possessed. The day's experience had taught her more than physical skills. It had shown her the power of preparation, the importance of patience, and the value of listening to guidance without losing one's own sense of judgment. As she settled near the fire, watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky, she reflected on the lessons of the day. The fear she had felt was real, but it had not controlled her. She had faced it, step by step, using careful thought, steady action, and the memory of the cowboy's words. She realized that courage was not about acting recklessly, but about moving forward despite fear. Guided by knowledge and careful planning, in the quiet of the evening, she felt a profound sense of accomplishment and readiness. The journey was far from over, but she now carried the tools, mindset, and confidence needed to continue. The morning sun rose slowly over the horizon, casting a warm glow over the path that lay ahead of Ayala. She stirred from her small campsite, her body sore from the previous day's journey. But her mind was focused and alert. The wagon sat before her, its weight a constant reminder of the responsibility she carried, not just for herself, but for her family and her entire community. The previous day had taught her a valuable lesson. Careful preparation and steady patience could overcome even the most daunting challenges. Yet, as she surveyed the trail ahead, she knew that this part of the journey would test her in ways she had not yet experienced. The path became steeper and rockier, winding through narrow valleys and climbing small hills that threatened to destabilize the wagon. She took a deep breath, feeling both fear and determination mingling within her. Ayala approached the wagon slowly, remembering the cowboy's advice. Sit down slowly. It was not just a command about posture or movement. It was a philosophy, a way to approach the entire challenge. She adjusted the reins, checked the harnesses on the horses, and carefully lifted herself into position. Her muscles protested, but she ignored the discomfort, focusing instead on each precise movement. The load in front of her seemed larger now, heavier, as if the night had magnified its size in her mind. She tightened her grip and allowed herself a moment to study the terrain. Every detail mattered. The placement of rocks, the slope of the hill, the direction of the wind. Her senses, sharpened by fear and concentration, took in everything. The first few steps were cautious. The wagon creaked as it moved over uneven ground, and she felt a subtle shift in the balance. Her heart raced, and she tightened her grip on the reins, guiding the horses with small, controlled movements. She reminded herself to breathe, to think, and to act slowly. Each adjustment she made prevented the load from tipping, each minor correction reinforcing her confidence. The path narrowed, forcing her to maneuver with precision. And she began to realize that fear could be transformed into focus. The anxiety she had felt the day before was no longer paralyzing. It had become a tool, sharpening her awareness and making her actions more deliberate. As she climbed a particularly steep incline, a sudden jolt caused the wagon to sway dangerously. The sacks of supplies shifted slightly, threatening to tumble. Ayala's breath caught, and she felt a flash of panic. But she remembered the cowboy's words, repeating them quietly to herself. Sit down slowly. Slowly. Deliberately. She shifted her weight, guiding the wagon back into balance. Her movements were careful but confident, each one grounded in observation and experience. The horses responded to her commands, their hooves finding stable footing on the uneven trail. For the first time, she felt a sense of harmony between herself, the wagon, and the animals. It was as if the challenge had become a rhythm, a careful dance that required attention, patience, and trust. The day wore on, and the sun climbed higher, turning the path into a trial of endurance. Sweat ran down Ayala's face, her arms ached from the constant effort, and her back protested the strain. Yet with each step, she gained strength not only physically but mentally. She discovered that fear, when confronted patiently and methodically, could be controlled and even transformed into determination. Her confidence grew with every successful maneuver, and she began to see the journey not as a burden but as a challenge she was fully capable of overcoming. The supplies, once intimidating, now seemed like companions, their weight a reminder of her capability rather than her limitations. Along the trail, she encountered obstacles that tested both her skill and patience. A fallen tree blocked the narrow path, and she had to guide the wagon around it carefully. She dismounted briefly, examining the best approach, and then directed the horses with precision, adjusting her weight and the position of the cargo to avoid tipping. Each small victory, each careful adjustment, reinforced her growing sense of mastery. She realized that courage was not reckless action but the ability to think clearly, act deliberately, and remain calm in the face of potential danger. Her mind, once clouded by fear, had sharpened, allowing her to approach each obstacle with careful strategy and confidence. As the day progressed, Ayala's thoughts drifted to her family. She imagined their faces, their gratitude, and the relief they would feel when the supplies arrived safely. This vision strengthened her resolve, reminding her that her actions were meaningful beyond her own immediate experience. Every careful step, every controlled movement, carried significance. She was not merely moving goods. She was safeguarding the well-being of those she loved. This awareness transformed her fear into purpose, giving her the mental and emotional stamina to continue despite exhaustion. The journey became not only a physical challenge but a lesson in responsibility, resilience, and quiet courage. By midday, she reached a stream cutting across the path. The ground was slippery and uneven, making the crossing treacherous. She approached slowly, carefully examining the depth and current. The horses were hesitant, sensing the difficulty ahead, and she spoke softly to reassure them. Her hands guided the reins with gentle but firm commands, encouraging the animals to move steadily through the water. The wagon dipped slightly as the wheels met the stream, and she held her position, adjusting her weight to maintain balance. Step by step, she guided the wagon across, feeling a surge of relief and pride as the other side came into view. It was a small victory, but one that reinforced the lessons she had been learning all along. The afternoon brought new challenges. The path narrowed further, forcing her to navigate around jagged rocks and steep slopes. At one point, the wagon teetered dangerously close to the edge of a shallow cliff. Ayela's pulse quickened, but she stayed calm. Applying everything she had learned, she repositioned the cargo, shifted her weight slowly, and guided the horses with steady hands. Inch by inch, she moved forward, her focus absolute. The fear that had once threatened to overwhelm her now served as a motivator, sharpening her awareness and enhancing her judgment. By the time she reached a small plateau, she felt a quiet sense of triumph. She had faced one of the most dangerous sections of the trail and had succeeded through careful, patient effort. As evening approached, the sky turned a deep shade of orange and pink. Shadows lengthened across the rugged landscape, and the temperature began to drop. Ayela found a small clearing to rest and set up camp for the night. Her body was exhausted, her muscles sore, but her mind was alive with reflection. She had faced challenges that initially seemed insurmountable. Yet with patience, preparation, and determination, she had overcome them. She realized that the journey was not merely about physical endurance but about mastering fear, cultivating focus, and learning to trust both herself and the guidance she had received. As she tended to the horses and secured the wagon, she thought back to the cowboy's words once more. "Sit down slowly." It was a simple phrase, yet it had guided her through every obstacle that day. It reminded her to move carefully, think deliberately, and act with intention. It was not just advice for handling a wagon. It was a philosophy for facing life's challenges. She understood now that fear was natural, but it could be managed through awareness, patience, and skill. Courage was not the absence of fear, but the decision to move forward despite it. Each careful step she had taken was a testament to this truth. During the night, as she sat by the fire, Ayela reflected on the growth she had experienced. She thought about how fear had initially threatened to paralyze her, yet with steady action, it had become a tool for focus. She realized that her strength was not just in her muscles or endurance but in her mind, her ability to think clearly, and her willingness to learn. The journey had transformed her, teaching lessons that extended beyond the physical challenge. She felt a quiet pride in herself, a sense of accomplishment that went deeper than simple success. She had faced fear, acted deliberately, and emerged stronger for it. As she drifted into a light sleep, the night air cool against her skin, Ayela felt a growing sense of confidence. The challenges ahead would be difficult, but she now carried the tools to face them. Preparation, patience, focus, and the memory of guidance that had helped her navigate the first part of her journey. She knew that the path was far from over, but she also knew that she had grown capable in ways she had not anticipated. The physical strain, the fear, and the careful attention to every detail had all contributed to a transformation. She was no longer simply a young woman carrying supplies. She was a person who had confronted fear, learned from it, and discovered the strength within herself. The morning light crept gently over the hills, casting long shadows across the uneven terrain as Ayala prepared to continue her journey. Her body was weary from the previous days, her muscles sore from the constant effort of guiding the heavy wagon. But her mind was sharper than ever. She had faced fear, uncertainty, and physical exhaustion. Yet each challenge had strengthened her resolve. Today, she knew, would be no different. The path ahead remained rugged, filled with obstacles and surprises, but she carried with her the lessons of patience, preparation, and careful action that had guided her so far. She looked at the wagon, now more familiar to her than she could have imagined, and felt a quiet sense of companionship with it, as though the heavy load were a partner in her journey rather than a burden. Ayala adjusted the reins, checking the harnesses on the horses with care. The morning air was crisp, filled with the subtle sense of earth and vegetation, a reminder of the wildness and beauty of the land she had to traverse. She took a deep breath, centering herself, remembering the cowboy's words that had become a guiding mantra. Sit down slowly. They were not just instructions for handling the wagon. They were words that reminded her to approach every challenge deliberately, to move with intention, and to face fear without letting it control her. She positioned herself carefully, letting her body absorb the lesson she had learned, that careful thought and steady action could transform even the most daunting task into something achievable. The first leg of the day's journey was through a narrow valley, where the trail wound between steep, rocky slopes. Each step required focus. Each movement had to be deliberate. Ayala guided the horses slowly, speaking softly to reassure them as much as herself. The wagon creaked and shifted, but she adjusted her weight with precision, keeping the load balanced. Her heart pounded at the thought of a misstep, but she reminded herself of all she had accomplished so far. She had crossed streams, navigated steep inclines, and guided the wagon around obstacles that had once seemed insurmountable. Each small success built confidence, reinforcing the idea that courage was measured not by the absence of fear, but by the ability to act thoughtfully despite it. As she emerged from the valley, the terrain opened into a wide plateau, giving her a rare moment to breathe and reflect. The wind carried the scent of distant pine and the faint sound of running water. She paused to adjust the load, checking each bundle to ensure it remained stable. Her body ached, but her spirit felt strong. She thought about the people waiting for the supplies, her family, her community, and felt a surge of purpose. The journey was not merely a physical task. It was an act of care, responsibility, and love. Every careful movement, every deliberate action, had meaning beyond the immediate struggle. The path ahead was still long, but she felt equipped, both mentally and physically, to continue. The afternoon brought new challenges. The trail became steeper, the rocks sharper, and the path less defined. At one point, the wagon teetered dangerously close to a small ravine. Ayala's pulse quickened, but she stayed calm, relying on the lessons she had internalized. She adjusted her weight slowly, guiding the wagon with steady hands. She spoke to the horses in gentle tones, encouraging them forward. Inch by inch, she navigated the treacherous section, her focus absolute. Each successful maneuver strengthened her confidence, proving to herself that preparation, patience, and determination could overcome fear. She began to notice a subtle shift within herself, a growing trust in her own abilities and judgment. She realized that she no longer needed to imagine the cowboy's voice. She had internalized his guidance, and it had become her own. As the day wore on, Ayala encountered a dense patch of forest. The path narrowed further, the trees casting long shadows, and the ground was uneven with hidden roots and fallen branches. The wagon struggled to move through the underbrush, and she had to navigate carefully to avoid tipping it. Her hands were rough and tired, her arms sore from gripping the reins, yet she persisted. She dismounted briefly to inspect the terrain, planning the best route. Each adjustment was deliberate, measured, and guided by observation. She spoke softly to herself, repeating instructions she had learned and steps she had practiced. The fear that might have overwhelmed her in the past now served as focus, sharpening her attention and ensuring that every movement was precise. Mid-afternoon, she reached a small stream, its water sparkling in the sunlight. The crossing was tricky. The ground beneath the water was uneven, and the current, though gentle, was enough to worry her. She guided the horses carefully, feeling the water shift around the wheels of the wagon. She leaned slightly, adjusting her balance as the load wobbled. And step by step, she moved across. When she reached the other side, a wave of relief washed over her. She smiled quietly to herself, recognizing how far she had come. The journey was still far from complete, but each obstacle she overcame was a testament to her courage, skill, and growing resilience. She realized that the physical act of guiding the wagon had transformed into a metaphor for life itself. Careful planning, focus, and determination could carry her through even the most challenging circumstances. As the sun began its descent, the landscape opened into a wide clearing. Ayela's eyes scanned the horizon, spotting familiar landmarks that signaled she was nearing the outskirts of her village. A sense of anticipation and pride surged within her. The journey, though exhausting, had been successful. She had faced fear, uncertainty, and physical strain, and she had triumphed. Her muscles ached, but her spirit soared. She adjusted the wagon one final time, ensuring that the load remained balanced for the last stretch. The horses, sensing the nearing destination, seemed to move with renewed energy, their hooves striking the ground with steady determination. The connection between herself, the animals, and the wagon felt complete, a harmony born of experience, focus, and mutual trust. The final steps toward the village were a mixture of relief and reflection. Ayela thought about how she had felt at the beginning of the journey, uncertain, afraid, and unsure of her abilities. She remembered the initial fear, the hesitation, and the heavy weight that had seemed impossible to manage. Now, with the village in sight, she could see how far she had come. She had learned that fear was not something to be ignored or dismissed, but a signal to prepare, act carefully, and trust in one's abilities. The cowboy's simple words, "Sit down slowly," had guided her not only in practical terms, but in mindset, helping her approach the entire challenge with patience, focus, and deliberate action. When Ayela finally entered the village, the reactions of those around her were immediate. Children ran toward her, their faces lighting up with excitement and curiosity. Women and men came forward, expressing gratitude for the supplies she had brought. The community recognized the effort, skill, and courage it had taken to complete such a challenging journey. Ayela's heart swelled with pride, not from recognition, but from the knowledge that she had accomplished something meaningful. Every careful step, every deliberate adjustment, every moment of patience had led to this point. The journey had tested her, shaped her, and proven that she was capable of more than she had imagined. As she unloaded the wagon, distributing the supplies among the community, Ayela reflected on the lessons she had learned. Strength was not measured solely by physical power, but by patience, careful thought, and determination. Courage was not the absence of fear, but the willingness to act despite it. She realized that guidance, when offered with respect and patience, could be a powerful tool. But it was the combination of that guidance and her own judgment that had allowed her to succeed. The experience had transformed her, giving her a deeper understanding of herself, her capabilities, and the value of persistence. Later, as the village gathered for a small meal in celebration of the safe delivery of supplies, Ayela found a quiet moment to herself. She thought about the cowboy, whose words had guided her throughout the journey. She realized that his advice had been more than practical. It had been a lesson in mindset, teaching her to approach life's challenges with patience, awareness, and determination. She smiled softly, feeling a quiet gratitude for the encounter that had changed the course of her journey. Though she had faced the obstacles alone, she had carried the lessons with her, internalizing them in a way that would serve her for the rest of her life. As night fell and the stars appeared in the clear sky, Ayela sat by the fire, reflecting on the path she had traveled. The wagon, once an intimidating burden, now seemed like a symbol of her growth, resilience, and courage. The journey had been long and difficult, but it had also been transformative. She understood that challenges, no matter how large, could be overcome with preparation, careful thought, and steady action. The memory of fear had not disappeared, but it had been reshaped into a tool for focus, determination, and personal growth. The simple advice, "Sit down slowly," had guided her through not just a physical journey, but a journey of self-discovery and strength. By the end of the evening, Ayala felt a profound sense of accomplishment. She had completed a task that had once seemed impossible. She had learned to manage fear, trust her own abilities, and act with patience and intention. The village was safe, the supplies were delivered, and the community was nourished, thanks to her courage and careful effort. As she settled down to rest, she carried with her not only the satisfaction of success but the knowledge that she had grown stronger, wiser, and more resilient. The journey had ended, but the lessons would stay with her forever, guiding her in every challenge that lay ahead.